Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Douglas County Master Gardener Public Speaker Bureau. Today we have Jack Landgreep, who is going to talk about how to awaken your garden and keep it healthy. So take it away, Jack.
Okay, well, thank you, Jeannie. You can get out of your rowboats now in your garden, and hopefully you're ready to get out there and keep your garden healthy and get it moving. We hope we get a little better weather for doing that. And today I'm going to use this as a way of covering a fair number of different topics, each one sort of interrelated, but nevertheless different. And in each case, we're just going to zoom in on the rudiments of that particular topic. We're not going to try to get into too much detail. So let's begin with pruning. Pretty important. Pruning your shrubs and trees. You might keep in mind that things like pruners, when you're using them in the garden, you really need to be careful when you're using them between different types of plants. It's very easy to transmit diseases. And so what you really need to do is after each shrub, maybe that you've pruned, you need to kind of dip those pruning blades in about a 10% solution of ordinary Clorox. That's all it takes. Just keep a bottle of Clorox around about the right size, 10% solution, 1 part Clorox, 9 parts water, and that will do the trick. Now, we're going to divide up into 2 groups, but you're going to see that these groups are very similar in terms of what you end up doing. One is deciduous shrubs that flower in early to mid-spring. Typically, these are plants that are flowering on old wood. That is, the buds have already formed in the fall of the year. They carry through the winter. And then sometime in the relatively early to mid-spring, they come into bloom. That's assuming that you don't have a late hard frost, which can kill the buds on this case. But nevertheless, the general rule is simple. You don't prune a tree like that until after it is finished flowering. Simple enough. Examples are given in the list. Forsythia, mock orange, lilac, etc., azaleas, some hydrangeas, but not all, and that's a whole topic unto itself. And then deciduous shrubs that flower in the late spring or summer. Now, these are typically flowering on new wood that develops after the winter and new buds that develop on that new wood. Again, the rule is the same. You prune only after flowering, better in late winter or early spring, but you can, in other words, the time to prune is not necessarily in the fall of the year, but rather it's really after the winter has pretty much gone away, at least you're starting to get warmer weather. That's when you go in and prune before any new growth starts. Then the new growth starts out, you get new buds, you get flowers. But you don't prune it till after that flowering is long gone. What about conifers? Except for yews, when you remove the branches on most conifers, pines for example, they're not going to be replaced. But you can slow down the growth by pinching or cutting back the candles that form in the spring. And the candles sometimes can be maybe several inches long. So if you cut those like in half, you will drastically reduce the growth of that plant for that particular year. So you can maintain a smaller conifer in that case over a period of years before it starts to get too large and maybe reaches the point where you might want to replace it. For roses, typically early April would be the time that most of them can be pruned and should be pruned. You can prune them back at that point, and it doesn't really matter much what kind of rose it is. These can be shrubs, miniatures. They can bloom on new wood in the spring or summer, typically. So they need to be pruned before new growth starts. So in the early spring, like I said, in April, you can cut back 12 to 18 inches. That applies to knockout roses too. All pretty much handled the same way. Climbing, hybrid tea, floribunda. The only thing you have to be careful of is if you have a grafted rose, you want to never prune below the graft. But aside from that, the general rules are really the same for all roses. Now, soil and other dirty things. How can I test my soil? What amendments are recommended? What about soil acidity? Things of that sort that come into your mind. Well, for soil tests, be sure you take like 10 soil samples. Now, if you take 9 or 8, no one's going to know. But nevertheless, you want to take them far apart. If you're doing it for a lawn, for example, don't put them all in a couple of square feet of the lawn. Spread them out over different parts of the lawn and go several inches down below the surface before you take your sample. You don't want the top surface soil. You want what's below that. That's what you need the information about. And so you go down several inches. You can use a trowel. There are special, for those of you who are master gardeners, there are gadgets available, I believe, still in the extension offices, which you can borrow, which will make taking soil samples a lot easier, but nevertheless, it's not that hard. Put them in a bucket, mix the dirt around, take about a 2-cup sample. Typically, that would be like a 1-quart Ziploc bag. Take your mixed sample, put it in that bag, just fill it up. If it's really a wet sample, you might want to air dry it, but that's normally not necessary. Put a label on it. Your name, address, phone number, email, where you took the sample from, because that'll come back to you in the form of a report. Then take it on into the Douglas County Extension Office at the 4-H Fairgrounds, the brick building, and take it right to the person at the desk. In many cases, it won't necessarily cost you anything to get this done. The Extension Office often has a type of a conservation grant, which will pay for the things of this sort up until the time that grant is used up. And it won't be used up early in the season, likely. It's more likely to be used up perhaps by July or August or something of that sort, late in the season. Nevertheless, and then at that time, when it gets used up, you may have to pay. But it's not a huge amount, and it'll give you back some really useful information. If they find that there's something peculiar about your soil and it needs some sort of treatment, they'll give you detailed information about what that treatment is, and what to buy, and how to put it on. In Douglas County, the pH of our soils tend to be on the high side, or alkaline, usually above 7. If they're not too alkaline, that's not a big problem, really. If they are very alkaline, that could be a problem, and you might need to add sulfur in order to lower the pH. Probably you will not have soil that's so acidic that it needs lime to raise the pH. That's rare. Probably not going to see that. Generally, these soils in Douglas County contain plenty of phosphorus and potassium. It's fairly rare that you find a deficiency. of either phosphorus or potassium. Clay content, generally high, especially in urban areas. You want to add organic material, compost, for example. We'll talk a little more about that in a second, but not gypsum. Gypsum is an old wives' tale. It does not do the job. It does not provide you with what you need to make a high clay content soil friendly toward plants. Don't work soil if it's wet. You know, you don't want to go into very wet soil and rototill, because that's just going to break down the soil particles and make them less effective as soil. What you want to do is increase the organic content, and that improves the drainage. You want to be sure to work that in for several inches. And this can be compost, either from the city or commercial compost in sacks, or compost can be a top dressing as well. But better to work it into the soil in order to make that clay soil improve its drainage. Now, a little bit on the fertilizers that we all have to deal with from time to time. Organic fertilizers in general are fine, but they are very slow release of nitrogen, typically. Compost, manure. You want to make sure manure is either composted or well aged. But otherwise, they're fine. They work great. And there's no question that you just have to be aware that they're going to release that nitrogen fairly slow compared with chemical fertilizers. Chemical types have slow to rapid release of nitrogen, depending upon exactly how they're constituted, and we'll go into that in just a second. You want to apply only the recommended amounts, because it's very easy to add a fertilizer that has a high nitrogen content and end up burning parts of your lawn. Nitrogen is right at the top of the list for the first number that you see on the bag. Then phosphorus and potassium, which, as I say, you probably won't have to deal with. So you want to look mostly at the nitrogen content. And this particular fertilizer really does not have a very high nitrogen content. This is a general purpose fertilizer for a lot of perennials and annuals and so on. And so it's not as high a content of nitrogen as you would find for lawns. As far as the rate at which the nitrogen is released, you want to look for urea. Urea nitrogen has the slowest release of nitrogen of all the things that you'll find in a chemical fertilizer. And if at all possible, you want that to be the largest percentage number. The rest of it, you don't have to worry about. When do you fertilize? Should I use grub control? Or should I apply crabgrass preventative? And when should I apply it? Watering, picking up clippings, and all that good stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but we had a senator from the state of Kansas, John Ingalls, who gave a speech in the U.S. Senate in 1874, in which he made this curious statement: forests decay, harvests perish, flowers vanish, but grass is immortal. I think you can get an idea of where he was headed with that. But speaking of grass, as far as mowing goes, the main thing you want to keep in mind is never cut more than the top third of a grass blade. You should have a sharp mower, preferably not a gas operated mower, if that's possible these days, but it is. There are mowers that are good push mowers for people that want the exercise, and There are mowers which are operated by very high efficiency lithium batteries now, which actually do a fantastic job. And I switched over to one of those recently. Leave the clippings on the lawn. That is, the recommendation is to mulch those clippings. They don't lead to a thatch problem. That's a kind of a wives' tale too, but it's not true. Clippings do not lead to thatch problems. Weed control in lawns. The best control is to just have a good, healthy, thick turf. No question about it. That way, weed seeds end up on top of the turf sometimes. When they do work their way down into the soil, they're very competing. They're competing with the grass, of course. They're shaded, so they don't get enough light. And so your chances of having the weed seeds germinate are far less. Not saying you're not going to have them, you're going to have them. But if you do have them and you have to use some kind of a herbicide, you want to spot treat, don't broadcast. So you don't want to use one of these types of, let's say, broadcasting sprayers that goes on the end of a hose. Especially you want to be careful about wind, which is a real problem, because there are a lot of windy days that we have to deal with gardening. And as soon as you start spraying herbicides, they're going to get onto shrubbery. They're going to get onto plants that you don't want them on. They're going to cause some damage, and you just don't want that. So you want to do spot spraying. Use one of these little tank sprayers where you can put the spray head down very close to the soil and just spray very small areas where you've got specific. So what you're doing is spraying individual weeds is what it really amounts to. And you can do that, unless you have a lawn that's total dandelions, you can do this. Make sure the temperature is above 50 and you don't want any rain or watering within about 24 hours, if at all possible. You don't want to wash that spray off until it's had a chance to do its job. Crabgrass pre-emergent. The rule is apply when the red bud is in full bloom. Actually, Forsythia works pretty well too. It has limited effectiveness. It's not going to get all of the crabgrass, and it doesn't kill crabgrass. In fact, it doesn't prevent crabgrass seed from germinating. So it's only when the crabgrass seed that has been put out in the fall of the year, because crabgrass dies in the winter, but it goes to seed before that, and I mean huge numbers of seed. Some of those seed are definitely going to germinate. Hopefully they will germinate within a period of maybe 6 or 8 weeks of this period when the red bud is in bloom. And so that's when you want to apply the pre-emergent. The pre-emergent kills the newly emerging seed that has just germinated. Once it gets to be a full-size plant and starts to root, it won't kill it. So it has to be there at the right time. And the pre-emergents that are available these days, in fact, are good for roughly 50 or 60 days. So they will stick around for a lot longer than you're aware. That doesn't mean you might not have to use another batch at a slightly later date to really catch all of it. Now, down at the bottom, be sure you read the label when you're seeding a lawn or putting on any new grass seed. The only two numbers that are important here are the ones labeled crop seed and weed seed. And the crop seed for your purposes in a lawn is a weed, but it just isn't labeled that way. And typically for a slightly less expensive seed, it'll be a 10th% crop seed, 0.05 weed seed, might be worse. And you want to try to avoid ones that are even higher percentage than these. But for a little extra money, you can reduce those numbers from a 10th% for the crop seed down to maybe a 100th% or 500ths. You can get it down to 0.05 for a reasonable crop of seed that's not terribly expensive, and 0.01 for the weed seed. And that's what you want to try to do. Those are the ones that are definitely going to cause you trouble. And the crop seeds typically are not materials that you can get rid of with some kind of a herbicide. You can't do that. You would kill the grass with a herbicide that would kill most of those crop seeds. So you're stuck with them. Once they're there and they start to grow, you're going to have them from that point on. Fertilization. Follow the guidelines, minimize use, follow what's on the label. Don't worry about getting out your calculator and calculating how many pounds of fertilizer I need to put on a fescue lawn in a 1,000-square-foot area. You don't have to worry about that. You do need to know roughly what the area of your lawn area is that you're going to fertilize. And that would have to be just something that you could pace off, multiply out length and width, estimate when it has a slightly odd shape, and that's generally going to be plenty good enough. For cool season grasses, September and November turn out to be the prime times to fertilize. Maybe May, if you're irrigating, if you're trying to keep the lawn alive all summer rather than letting it go slightly dormant or totally dormant. It just depends on your usage of water and what you want to achieve. September and November sounds odd at first, but it's not. That's the time in the late summer and into the fall of the year that, in fact, the grass is developing a much more sturdy crown structure, and that will overwinter much better and come back in the spring much better. So you're putting on your fertilizer very late in the year, which will last all winter and take you through the spring, at least up till May. I'm not even going to talk about warm season grasses because I don't like Bermuda. But I mean, my feeling about Bermuda is don't fertilize it at all. If you're using a high nitrogen fertilizer for fertilizing your cool season grass, the first number should be greater than 25. Typically, it's around 29 or 30. And the principal source, as we said before, of the nitrogen should be urea. As far as how much water to apply, usually it's 1 to 1.5 inches per week of water that's applied. And you can get that figured out by putting some small cans or cups, maybe with a rock in the bottom, so they won't get turned over by the wind or something. Spread them out on your lawn area, or could be a non-lawn area. And then after you've run your sprinkler system or done your normal watering, you can check to see how much water has accumulated in those cans. Average it. How many times a week do you normally water like that? Multiply that and find out approximately how much water per week you're putting in that area. And of course, when there's plenty of rainfall, which we've had recently, don't water extra. Use a rain gauge, try to figure out, how much rain have I had? Do I really need to do any extra watering or not? You may for hanging planters, perhaps, for some other types of pot planters, but beyond that, you may not have to do anything else. Now, pesticides and pests are a whole different world. Which ones are safe? Will they harm beneficial insects? And here is this gets very tricky. Harmful versus beneficial. On the right, if you have a butterfly garden, you're going to like this guy because he's going to turn into a beautiful butterfly. On the other hand, he's a harmful insect from the standpoint of what he does to the plants. On the left is the larva of our little beetle friend that you're all familiar with, the ladybug. And this guy is extremely beneficial to the plants because he gobbles up things like aphids like you wouldn't believe. And the aphids which are attacking your plants are going to be almost totally eliminated if you have very many of these on the same plants. So he's a beneficial insect. The other one, in principle, in terms of what they do to the plants, is going to be a harmful insect. The beneficial insects or predators are the ones that you want in general to be around most of the time, all of the time. If you're going to use a pesticide, you have to realize that the pesticides are not, generally speaking, discriminating. They are going to kill all insects, beneficial and not beneficial. So you're not just going to get rid of the insects that you want to, you're going to get rid of some of the insects that are actually helpful. What are the methods you can use to control insects without dealing with pesticides? Well, you can use water. If you have a dwarf Alberta spruce, which gets mite problems quite often, all you need to do to keep those under control is 2 or 3 times a week, go out with your garden hose and a fine, narrow spray like a jet stream and hit that dwarf Alberta spruce from top to bottom all the way around with that jet stream. And what you will do in that case is kill the mites by knocking them off the tree, ripping out their mouth parts, and once they hit the ground, they're as good as dead. You can use mild insecticides with low toxicity. Things like insecticidal soap, for example. Insecticidal soap, unfortunately, is not the cheap household dishwashing liquid. It doesn't really do a good job at all as an insecticide. It turns out that the length of the carbon chain in the soap molecule has to be different than what is typically done to make household dishwashing detergents. And so you've got to go to more expensive types of soaps, got to go to a regular nursery, for example, to get those, or Home Depot or places like that. And they are going to be a little more expensive. no question about it. But you need that to do the job, and they're particularly good because they're really non-toxic, just like the dishwashing soap. They can be used on household plants. They can be used around where there are children. Uh, if you put your finger on a plant that's been sprayed with this and put it in your mouth, it's not going to hurt you. And then there are dormant oils. Dormant oils are particularly good for certain types of insects, maybe scale insects on euonymus type leaves, where they can be applied in the fall of the year particularly, and they will kill those scale insects in a very straightforward way, and they're not going to be a problem for dogs or cats or people getting near them or handling them or feeling them. Pyrethrins and rotinones have some mild toxicity, but they're generally quite low, and there are quite a variety of them, and they can be used as well. They're kind of down the list just a little way. And then there are biological methods. BT is a bacterial, which is harmless to people and animals, but it will cause problems for any kind of larva. So it kills larvae. It doesn't care whether the larvae are going to turn into butterflies or whether they simply eat plants and won't turn into butterflies. It's going to kill them no matter what. So you have to be very careful if you have something like a butterfly garden as to using things like that. There's something called conservation biological control. Some people have heard of this, some people have not. But one general way, without the use of any pesticides, of having some control over the insects in your garden is to simply plant a wide variety of plants. And that's it. It's that simple. In other words, you can have perennials, annuals, bushes that flower. As long as there's a wide variety of those, they will attract a wide variety of insects. And it turns out that most of the insects that are attracted are going to end up being predators. So the number of harmful insects to those plants will actually be fairly minimal. Some plants benefit by having predators attracted by the plant next door. And so the net result of that is that you have reasonable control. No, every flower is not going to have a perfect set of petals necessarily. There's going to be a blotch here or there. You have to put up with that. But nevertheless, you can avoid pesticides almost entirely by thinking in terms of conservation biological control. Water and mulch. Well, there are lots of different types of mulch. Clearly beneficial. You know, maintains moisture. The straw mulch shown in the picture would be good for vegetable gardens. Particularly, it makes it easy to harvest, and they fairly quickly will go back into the soil. It inhibits weed growth, maintains the temperature, maybe even makes it slightly cooler, gives it a natural look. Organic mulches of various types are all generally good. Dry leaves, needles, grass clippings, shredded bark, wood waste, all of these things are typically used, and they're all good and will help control weeds as well as maintain moisture. So they serve more than one purpose. I'm not going to talk to you about volcanoes around trees. There are a lot of them. And all you have to do is walk around Lawrence and you'll see plenty of these. This one is okay. Why is it okay? Because the person who put that there, first of all, pulled it away from the base of the trunk so that there's actually, you see some grass showing there around that trunk. and that's okay. That's what you want. So you don't want to pile up the mulch directly against the tree. Then you got girdling roots, and you've got a chance for small critters to form nests and chew away at the outer bark and inner bark and make a mess out of your tree and shorten its life. Right plant, right place. Read the labels. I always tell people that because it's so important and it can give you really valuable information. You always want to check and see what is going to be the mature size of this particular shrub or tree or whatever it is. Space the plants in such a way to reduce maintenance. So in the case of this hedge, for example, you can see that it's virtually jammed up against, whoops, let me go back one. It's jammed up against that wall back here. I can't be sure, I don't remember where this is exactly that I took the picture, but the wall obviously could use some maintenance. And you're going to have a hard time doing that because you've got the bush right up against it. So you're going to have to do some serious pruning back here in order to get that bush far enough away from the wall that you can maintain it properly. And presumably you could have found that out by looking carefully at the label dimensions, which tells you what the mature bush is going to be in terms of width and height. If you've got a tree or utility problem, that small tree you planted could eventually become a hazard, and it may not take that long. The rule is the desired height for a tree that's going to end up more or less under some kind of utility wires should be no more than 15 to 20 feet. In other words, you should look at the label, make sure you get trees that are good trees for understory trees, trees that grow well under other trees, for example, and that don't get too tall. Japanese maples are typical, red buds, things of that sort, where the height will never get above 20 feet, and preferably a little less than that. Now, as gardens become older, they generally become shadier very often. If you have a lot of trees around, which are young trees, when you buy the house, then later on, they're going to become a lot more troublesome in that regard. So you're going to get encroaching shade. That's a little corner of my garden shown there. We talk a lot when you're dealing with shade coming into a garden with paying very close attention to microclimates. It's a good idea to pay close attention to microclimates, whether it's shade or not. If there's any kind of shading at all that takes place, it'd be a good idea to keep track of it. And you're going to have to go out in the garden and you're going to have to watch where the sun is, where the sun is shining, and you're going to have to do it faithfully for at least several days, maybe a week, in the morning, at noon, sometime later in the afternoon. I'm considering here an 8-hour day lasting from about 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I'm going to classify, I've tried to boil this down over the years to something that's pretty easy to deal with and remember. You can classify light shade being 2 to 3 hours of shade, and the rest of your 8 hours is sunny. So there's quite a bit of sun in light shade. And generally speaking, most sun-loving plants will grow with light shade without a real problem. There are a few that are particularly sensitive and need literally full day of sun. Medium or partial shade, and that includes dappled shade, like all day dappled, as opposed to medium shade in some part of the day and then much higher rate of level of shade in some other part. Roughly half. In other words, half of your day is partial shade. Half of your day has some considerable amount of sun in it too. You will get some sun-loving plants to grow in conditions like this, but not all of them. And one of the things that you'll find with sun lovers is that they may grow and thrive in that sense, but they won't necessarily have as many flowers. In other words, they'll have less floriferousness than if they had more sun. So they probably would like the light shade, but they might not like the medium or partial shade. But your shade-loving plants, a lot of them, can handle the amount of sun that they get in medium or partial shade. Not all of them. Full shade, we're not talking about growing mushrooms here. Full shade, not dense. In other words, you can sit down in a chair in full shade and read a book. Some plants want that. And that is something you need to scour the information on the label for. That's where it's very important. And you'll find some very subtle things on that label. You'll find some places where it says, this plant wants full sun to partial shade. And then you'll find another one that says, nope, this plant wants partial shade to full sun. Is that the same thing? No, it's not always the same thing. It's not always easy, and you do make mistakes, and you're going to find, you're going to lose some plants along the way because of these little subtleties. Avoid afternoon sun on plants that say they need medium or partial shade. That's one thing that you want to put into this little set of rules to kind of keep your plants alive, hopefully. Because too much sun, there are some hostas that can handle quite a bit of sun. But there are even those plants, if they're into later afternoon, really bright, hot sunshine, will end up with burned leaves. High shade. Limb up your trees. If you have plenty of trees in your shade garden, limb them up, if at all possible, to 10 or 20 feet above the ground. Now, there are a lot of benefits to that. There are some possible detriments. We'll mention them. Benefits are usually more important. You get more light. You still get the benefits of shade. And there's room under those trees to grow other trees and large shrubs. So you can grow undercover trees and shrubs. You can grow things like Japanese maples and so forth. There are a lot of trees that will grow under other trees. But you get more light, even though you maintain the benefits of shade from the standpoint of coolness and getting out of the sun. The detriments are you might get more hot, dry winds, so there could be a plant dehydration problem, but that's probably not going to be a major problem compared with the benefits. Okay, as we finish up, help is on the way. Horticulture Hotline at the Extension Center is 785-843-7058. Anybody can call that number and check to see, first of all, is there a master gardener on duty on the hotline? And they might want to come in and actually talk to that person and bring a sample of a plant problem that they're having. That's the time you can do that. It's not a problem. You can also go to Douglas County Garden Hotline at gmail.com if you want to simply contact a master gardener by way of Gmail. Give them the information, send them a photograph of what your problem is, and then they will try to get you a response within the same day or within 24 hours. Now, right now, as I understand it, there's a master gardener on duty Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I believe it's in the afternoon. So I think it's like 1 to 4, something of that sort. But you find that out by phoning that number. And they are very, very good at doing this. They have a lot of resources, and they know how to look for problems that people have, and they take a tremendous interest in getting you an answer as quickly as possible. It's totally free. You don't have to worry about that. You're not talking to someone who's working for a company that's trying to sell you something. It's not like that at all. And so you're going to get straight information. All right. Thanks for attending, and happy gardening.
Thank you so very much, Jack. That was really informative. You covered a lot of ground, shall we say.
I know, too much ground.
No, it was very, very helpful. I'm going to ask Darlene if she has any questions she'd like to ask, if she'd like to unmute herself or make any comments. If not, I have, oh, go ahead, Darlene.
I got in here late because I got home a little bit late, and then I had trouble hooking up to it, but I finally made it. So I'm going to have to watch the very first.
Do you have a comment or a question for Jack? Maybe while you're thinking of questions or comments on the portion that you saw, I'm going to ask Jack if you would please clarify the soil testing procedure. So you said to take 10 samples of several inches below the ground. So do you mean, like, if I was in one garden bed, do I take 10 different samples around that one bed and then I mix that and that's called one sample? Or
Yeah.
Are you doing the same thing for, or you have 10 different samples from 10 different parts of your garden, which is just a soil sample? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You don't want to mix samples from one type of garden that you have with a different type. So
Okay.
if you've got a flower garden area or a vegetable garden area or a lawn, you want those to be 3 separate sets of samples.
Okay.
And in each case, depending upon the size, now for a lawn, you probably do want 9 or 10 actual samples down about 3 inches and more. And in the case of a very small flower garden, you might not need that much. You know, you can certainly do with less, but they do like to have an amount of soil that's equivalent to, as I say, to about a quart size Ziploc bag,
Okay.
you know, basically full of dirt.
Okay. So I could bring in 10 separate soil samples.
Yeah.
Ziploc bag. So, because I got confused when you were talking about mixing samples in a bucket, and that's where I got confused.
Well, yeah, you mix the individual samples that you get with the trowel in a bucket from a given
From one bed.
area, from, say, the lawn.
Okay.
So you
Got it.
take all those samples from the lawn, you mix those in a bucket,
Gotcha.
and then that's what they're looking at. they're
Oh.
looking at a kind of an average of what they see in your whole lawn or what they see
Right.
in your whole vegetable garden.
Right.
So
Okay.
you probably don't want samples that are right next to broccoli, but not next to your tomatoes. You want to go back. You want to take samples from all around.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Um, uh, yes, I'm one of those people who struggles with Bermuda grass. That's what I was handed, the hand I was dealt when I moved in. So I don't leave any grass clippings on that lawn because I don't want to
don't.
nurture it any more than it already is nurtured,
Yeah, I agree.
nor do I water it.
Well, that's interesting because at our church we have a section, a pretty large section of lawn area, which is primarily all Bermuda grass, and I don't think that has been. We don't fertilize it, and we don't water it, and I don't think we have done either of those things for the last 15 years.
Mhm.
And the Bermuda grass still grows very well, believe me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why some people plant it, right? Because
Yeah,
it's
right.
like no maintenance. It will take
It's a
over.
low maintenance type of grass.
Right.
Yeah,
And and nothing kills it. I've tried. Nothing kills
dude,
it whatsoever.
it's hard.
Not even fire.
Yeah, you're right. It is hard.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I was wondering, you were talking about dormant oils.
Yeah.
Years ago, I read that canola oil is another organic solution. Basically, it's a vegetable oil.
Yeah.
And you spray that on some bugs. I mean, it just their wings get so oily that they drop off the plant and they can't survive. So I was curious about canola.
Well, that probably would work, actually. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that did pretty much the same thing as the dormant oil that you buy at a nursery. I think that'd be worth a try.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I did it before I found out that the soldier bugs were good guys.
Yeah.
But they were eating a whole bunch of perennials in the back, and flowers and whatnot, and so it was before
Yeah,
I got
yeah.
educated and realized I was killing the good guys. So, oh well, I'm sorry.
Well, they can devour a lot of plant material.
They can. Yeah, but I wasn't sure like what bugs, what other bugs they eat. I mean, why are soldier bugs beneficial?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that could work.
Okay. Do you have any tips on pruning viburnums? I've started a little collection, and I'm sensing that different cultivars need different kinds of pruning, and I'm not sure. Can you talk?
That may be. I think I've only got one viburnum bush that's alive and healthy, and basically I hardly ever pruned it at all. I've just let it grow up to a height of about 5 feet, 6 feet almost. Places, and it bloomed nicely this year in the spring. Didn't have any problem with that.
Do you know which cultivar it is?
Winter Thur, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what it's called.
All right. I bought Michael Durr's major book on viburnums, and he doesn't talk about pruning. Because I bought it to find out which cultivars need which kinds of pruning, because the sense that I get is it's really your own individual preference. If you want it to kind of grow more wide or more tall, or grow it like a tree, or you know what I mean? And it just depends on all the individual different cultivars, I think.
Well, it definitely, they usually bloom in the spring. Now, maybe you've got some cultivars that don't do that, but the ones that bloom in the spring, you certainly could wait till after they bloomed and then prune.
Right.
And I think that would work. I don't think that'd be a problem.
Okay, but I think it's a matter of taste on which, like old canes you want to cut at the base, or, I'm just not sure.
Oh, but yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay.
Yeah, none of the canes, well, I do have some older canes on
Mhm.
this one. There are some older and some younger, both.
Okay. Darlene, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to add?
Like I said, I didn't get in on the
You're
beginning
fine,
of it.
you're fine. Just based on what you heard, do you have other questions or comments you wanted to add?
I've got some soil where in my different beds that I've had flowers planted, and it's very yucky clay soil. And I've tried to mend it a little bit, but what is your best suggestion for trying to break down the clay soil?
The clay soil,
Yeah.
the best thing on clay soil is going to be to use some kind of compost, to work some compost into that soil. That's got to be your number one. No
Okay.
question about it. And it could be any kind of compost. Could be your own compost or sacked compost that you buy, stuff that you get from the city has been very careful about their compost in terms of testing. They test it very regularly and routinely for any signs of any pesticides. If they get grass clipping from someone that's put a herbicide on the grass, or herbicide rather, a herbicide on the grass, they detect that and they will reject that batch of their compost. So they've been very careful about that because they had problems with it. I think way back when they first started doing the composting, they did have some problems, and they greatly enhanced their checkup and testing regime, and have, I think now it's pretty good. So you can be, it's safe.
Okay. And if you have mounds that are bigger than, you want to get rid of some of the dirt, where do you get rid of dirt? Like the clay?
Yes. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure where you take it. I'd be inclined to put it way in the back of my yard someplace
Right.
where
I tend
nobody
to
can
mix,
see it.
yeah, I tend to